Yes, if you'd like to kick us off, Tony.
So a big warm Coffee Buddies welcome to everyone. Lots of familiar faces and some excellent new ones. So welcome to everyone. We're a highly including group and always a great pleasure to see new faces. And we pride ourselves on within an hour to entertain, engage and inform. And this session, we're delighted to have Kristen come to talk to us. And Kristen is going to help us think through this magical mystery area called digital health, which I'm very fascinated to fathom out. And Kristen, maybe welcome to the group. And you're a regular, I know, but welcome. And maybe you kick off by just telling us who you are and what you do, Kristen.
Yeah, I am the host now, apparently.
Yes, I'm just making you host.
Exciting. Exciting. I am a frequent attendee of lots of Zoom meetings these days, not so often presenting, but actually a lot of my clients are remote anyway. I've been working remotely for many years, but I'm getting used to Zoom instead of Skype for business. So why don't I share my screen, because I've got a slide on a bit of who I am. So we can start there. We can talk about who I am and what I'm going to talk about digital health. So I started out like a lot of you. I studied molecular biology, so definitely a science bench research kind of person. And then I went to medical school at Columbia in New York. And while I was in medical school, I was really struck by like, really, this is the way we do things. This is how we make decisions about stuff, sort of smart people writing things down on little pieces of paper. It didn't really seem to be particularly data driven to me. So I was sort of wondering how can we use some of the things that were coming onto the scene in the early 2000s to practice medicine better, to deliver better care, but also to make doctors less miserable. They're quite unhappy people a lot of the time. So the long story short is I ended up moving to England, and I worked with Brunswick Group, which is corporate comms for pharmas and biotechs. Well, I was working with pharmas and biotechs. They do corporate comms for all kinds of companies. And after spending 4 years there, I started working directly in digital health. So I was the chief medical officer of a company called BioBeats that recently got acquired, and also did some work with Cambridge with Richard, who hosted our call last week on Smart Villages around energy access as a foundation for healthcare and education in developing countries. So moving from medicine to sort of business, and how do people make decisions about things they want to do for their company, and then how should they make decisions about these new things that are coming onto the scene. So what should companies do about social media? What should companies do about collaborating with some of these new tools that are starting to be available in the early 2000s? And I have now worked with so many digital health companies that I continue to work with digital health companies. I work with investors who want to invest in them at Innovation Warehouse, and I work with corporates who might want to partner with them, whether it's through pharma or in other industries. And I've gone from winning Innovate UK grants with BioBeats to evaluating them. So I assess grants for Innovate UK as well, which is part of UKRI. So that's a bit of who I am and what I do. People ask me what I do, and I say I know a little bit about a lot of things.
And do you miss the stethoscope?
Sorry?
And do you miss the stethoscope?
I do. I was actually talking to a med school colleague last week who also runs a big population health company in the US. And we both have dreams about being back in med school and not remembering anything anymore. And then we wake up and it's all okay because we know about other stuff. It's all right.
Fantastic. Maybe unfold a bit of what this magical digital area is.
Absolutely. There are lots of ways to explain it and to slice and dice it. So I thought I would take a cue from how the American Medical Association does that. So they put out a report at the end of last year, which is already completely outdated, but it was, this is how the AMA defines digital health tools. So they talk about, starting at the left, don't worry about the numbers, just look at the categories: telehealth and virtual visits, and then 2 kinds of remote monitoring, clinical decision support, and patient engagement. So I am going to talk through those 4 categories and give you some examples that you need to be aware of if you're working in life sciences. I'm going to skip workflow enhancement, things like admin automation, even though it's actually probably the most impactful thing that you can do in medicine. It's not particularly sexy. And records access, patients being able to access their records, because that's quite straightforward. And I'm also going to skip AI for drug discovery, because it's also pretty straightforward in terms of what it does what it says on the tin, and in terms of who pays for it and who gets the value. The thing that's really interesting about digital health is the question of who's recommending it, who's using it, and who's paying for it. So like a lot of healthcare, those are all 3 completely different entities, and aligning the interests of those entities is where things are going to be successful. And there are some success stories and a lot of failures in sort of the early days of this. So let's talk through these 4 categories and have lots of questions, because I won't have all the answers, but I will have had the questions many times. So let's talk about category number 1, televisits and virtual visits, as the AMA calls it. People call this telemedicine. So these the biggest companies in telehealth and telemedicine are in the US, because physicians bill fee for service. So if they're conducting a visit over a platform, they're then able to submit a bill for it. And the more visits they do, the more they get paid. Completely different from a capitated model in Europe, where you're responsible for a certain number of patients and you need to take care of them. So in the US, you have companies that are raising hundreds of millions of dollars. They're listed on stock exchanges. Teladoc is already a listed company, and Amwell is probably going to list this year. There are rumors. McKinsey just put out a report a couple of weeks ago estimating that this market will grow from £3 billion a year to $250 billion. So looking at the growth of this market, and that's not all new care being delivered. It's a shift from some face-to-face care to remote care, to telemedicine. And these things all existed before. Telemedicine has been around since the telephone was around, and things have gotten slightly better, but it's the current situation that's really been a tipping point for it, that payers are willing to pay for it. It's not the technology holding things back across the board in digital health. It's who is willing to pay for it, and who are you demonstrating that value to. So Teladoc and Amwell, 2 big companies in the US. Babylon, well known in the UK, they raised £500 million from various dubious sources. Cree is a big Swedish company that's recently just raised another 155 million in a round to expand across Europe. And these are companies that primarily do video visits, but there are also companies that do asynchronous messaging. So it's like texting your doctor rather than having to schedule a video visit and show up for your video visit. You can text them, and then when they have time, they can text you back. It doesn't have to be your doctor. It can be somebody else in the network. You don't always need to see your doctor to have something simple sorted out. So these are systems.
Is this the beginning of a bot being at the end of your video call? So, because the next stage has to be question and answers, doesn't it? So it's almost, you could use robotics, or you could use artificial intelligence to cut out the human first pass.
That's exactly what the companies are doing. So Dockley, the heart logo on the right of this slide, is the UK arm of MinDoctor, which is a Swedish company that's been going since 2013. So you don't need a doctor doing all of the initial medical history taking for a lot of visits. That can be automated and parsed into a very short patient presentation to the doctor, who can then look at that and carry on much quicker. Babylon says that they do that a little bit as well. So it's adding efficiency to the system. There's a lot of work being done right now on telemedicine, and a video visit doesn't add really any efficiency to the system other than saving travel time for a patient. So it's these other sort of asynchronous platforms that I think are really interesting. AccuRx has been a big winner in the coronavirus situation in the UK. These are enabling digital triage, so enabling people really to go through algorithmic answers to questions and then be triaged for who needs to be seen sooner. It's still evolving. It's not something that's perfect, but it's something that things are moving towards, and it's stuff that people are willing to start people are starting to pay for these things. And when you say people starting to pay for these things, you have to think about which market you're talking about. Are you talking about a market like the UK that generally has fairly good access to healthcare? Or are you talking about a market like China, where 500 million people have only in the past few years been added on to sort of the national health program and have zero access or only minimally trained, access to minimally trained healthcare professionals? So people, these B2C platforms where people are willing to pay themselves will gain traction in Asia, whereas they're not going to gain traction at all in Western companies. The business model is what's going to drive things forward. But in terms of you've got companies that are telemedicine companies, and then what we've also seen over the past few months is companies that are already embedded into the system and integrated, like medical record systems, are starting to add telemedicine as a feature within their record systems as well. So it's not just companies that's their only product. It's starting to, people are adding things as features, and it's really getting a lot more pervasive. And that's quite new because it's been around for a long time. I was part of the original team at Babylon in 2014. I mean, this is, almost 7 years ago, 6.5, 7 years ago at this point. So things have not moved this quickly, except for in the past 3 months. It's been a real acceleration, and the acceleration has not been in the technology. It's been in payers' willingness to actually pay for it. So category 1 of digital health, telemedicine. Category 2, I'm squishing both of the AMA's remote monitoring categories together. So what is remote monitoring? Remote monitoring is using the new kinds of technologies that are available to us, whether they're sensors and wearables or smartphones, to collect data in the real world and feed that back to physicians so that they can make more informed decisions about your care. So remote monitoring can count physician dashboards who are able, there are dashboards that can view a population of patients and send up red flags for people who are going to take a downward turn before they do, so that people can intervene earlier and actually enable prevention. And some of these are clearly in the medical space, some of these are more in the consumer space, but they're starting to merge together. When I was at Babylon in the early days, and when I was CMO of BioBeats, it was all very consumer. It was very who's going to pay for it, and it was completely separated. But fast forward 7 years, and you have Apple getting FDA approvals for functionality of their smartwatch. You have Google buying Fitbit and running actual medical grade studies to detect atrial fibrillation. There's this movement towards the consumerization of medicine, of things getting more beautiful, like easier to use, because people have a choice in what they use. And also the medicalization of consumer brands, of things starting to move together. It wasn't a reality 7 years ago, but it is now. And it's actually really interesting to see it evolving in real time and seeing how different things can be over the course of 5 years, of things moving from stuff being looked at as a toy, or toys for the healthy and wealthy or the worried well, to actual approvals as medical devices or things. And the FDA has really lowered their barrier. I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it used to be that people would get European approval for things first, for software as a medical device, and then look at going to the US. But it's been quite relaxed in the US, I think, because they want to get more things into the market, and then they continue to monitor it. So now the US is kind of the place to be for these things. So what's the relevance to pharma? The relevance to pharma is that companies like Huma, in the top left, are collecting real world evidence that can be used to support regulatory approval for products, and to support reimbursement, especially in companies where real world evidence of improved outcomes is required to keep reimbursing for things. And if you want an example with a nice big number on it, it was 2018 when Roche acquired Flatiron, which is an oncology electronic health records platform, for 1.9 billion. So, I mean, usually we think of digital health as sort of small companies or as startups, but there is value to pharma, and it usually revolves around the data. So the main takeaway from remote monitoring is about the data, and it continues to get better and better and more clinical grade. So the next category that the AMA says digital health can be divided into is clinical decision support. Probably the thing that gets talked about the most in the media for clinical decision support is AI analysis of imaging. We've seen a lot of that in the whole COVID-19 scenario, where AI is analyzing chest x-rays or chest CTs or other things. But there have been probably monthly publications for several years on AI image analysis. But the issues really are not around the technology. The issues that are blocking progress on it are not understanding how the technology makes its decision, not really having a clear answer on who owns the data. Who is responsible for the decisions that the computer is making, that the AI is making. So it's sort of people challenges and philosophical things that are holding it back a bit more than the technology, which I think is also really interesting to follow in real time about how opinions change over time. Another example, I think this had an approval last week or a few weeks ago, point of care imaging and auscultation. So you can have AI that's complementing what a radiologist does from actual medical images. But what's really interesting is decision support at the point of care for doctors. So this is an example of a point of care ultrasound. There are also digital stethoscopes. There are other things that help doctors make different decisions. And I think that's also relevant to pharma. I think it's relevant in terms of that decision-making process, in terms of segmenting patients who may or may not benefit from the therapy. And I think it's a trend to watch. I don't think there are any clear answers, but the regulatory approvals for these technologies for clinical decision support are coming through consistently. So it's something to take a look at. And a fun one is the growth of chatbots, which I think we need a better name. Maybe we should call them virtual assistants. But in Asia, we're seeing lots of chatbot support, both for patients and for doctors making decisions. And I've also seen examples of chatbot support for pharma products in Europe, implemented in Europe. Really what it comes down to is, can you help? There's no lack of information, but can you help busy people find the information that they need as quickly as possible?
I mean, just one question. If you're in a pharma company that is developing a drug for 7 years, who and where do you get your digital strategy? I mean, do I have a department of digital thinking that I go to when it's in before phase 1? Where, because it to me it's a multi-layered opportunity, whatever you want to call it, but to pull it all together around a drug or something requires quite a lot of thinking. How do they do it?
They have people like me. They hire me. No, sometimes they have. It depends on the company. Sometimes there'll be sort of a digitally minded person on a particular, product team or within a particular therapeutic area that's kind of across that area. Sometimes there's a central team in the company that's job is to keep all of those other teams up to speed on stuff. I mean, one of the main things I learned at Brunswick, actually, in terms of advising CEOs on how to make strategic business decisions, is not to underestimate the power of best practice, which to me was copying. So tracking what's going on, I'm joking, but having a real clear idea of what is everybody else doing, what's been done before, what's been successful, and what's failed. And who are the leading partners? Medopad, who's recently rebranded to be Huma, who I mentioned a few slides before, does do tons of pharma partnerships. I was having a conversation with them about a year ago. It might have actually been at CogX a year ago, and they basically said they have so many pharma partners they don't even need more intros. So it's like I think there are certain players that have done it before. So in terms of how do you know what to do, when do you involve people? I think if you work with companies that have done it before, or digital health companies that have a well thought out pharmaceutical partnering strategy, they will also have some answers. And I think it's something that's constantly developing, and it doesn't always work out. There are some notable pharma digital partnerships that pharma pulled the plug on in the past 6 months. So I think it's an evolving question, and I think there are a couple people on the call that that work at some digital health companies that also might want to chime in on that, or maybe we'll have it more in questions.
It's just trying to understand the bridge between, if you like, the wet work biological thinkers and the people who've got computers, and it's trying to understand how you put it all into a big pot.
I think sometimes it doesn't. I think sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, and people are still trying to find their way. I think a lot of the partnerships that were put together in 2017, 2018, some are still working, some are figuring out how to work together, and some now have ended.
Because if if say you're developing a COPD drug and you've got 7 years to go, do you build in a digital strategy for X-ray measurements? What, when, and how do you put it all together? That's of interest.
These are great questions. Let's see if some of the callers on the call have some answers for them as well, because I think it's something that's evolving. A lot of the answers that I've seen over the past few years have been around identifying patients who might benefit. So taking things that we already know and then trying to have better access to data for patients who might benefit in that development phase, and then following them once drugs are marketed, following them to be able to support reimbursement.
Yeah. Which is, sorry, I'm holding you up. If you get to the next slide, then.
I thought I might have an answer in the next slide, but it might be 2 slides down. I want to come back to that question. Let's come back to that question as well, when to involve pharma companies. So there is a good example here of a post-marketing partnership of when to involve a pharma company. So the last category that I wanted to talk about from that AMA classification is patient engagement, which anyone who works in pharma knows is a really broad kind of catch-all for engaging with patients, patient engagement. And I think it's what most people think about when they think about digital health, is an app on your phone. And I think that's where it all started, but it's moved on quite a bit since then. So I wanted to have some grown-up examples of what patient engagement looks like in 2020, because it's not what it looked like in 2015. So it's really evolved quite a lot from online patient communities that are just sort of there to support each other, that pharma might support with some sort of educational grant. They've really evolved into supportive entire platforms and real communities or teams of health coaches that are helping people and predicting who is going to have poor outcomes and trying to intervene with them early. So and they're well funded, and they're actually earning money and being reimbursed. One of the key questions of digital health is who is going to pay for that. So one of my favorite examples, a lot of these examples are from the US. I think a company that does a really good job at this kind of cardiovascular patient engagement, cardiovascular behavior change is a company called Livongo. So they raised, last year, they had some really interesting corporate events. They raised 100 million pounds. They bought 2 other companies, and then in the middle of the year, they listed on the NASDAQ. So they debuted in July 2019, and now they're a listed company. They're reporting their earnings. So they actually are earning money for their digital health patient engagement platform. And the reason why they are earning money is because they have the data and the evidence to show that people have improved outcomes when they're using this platform. So what does the platform do? It has access to coaches. It helps people with all of those personal choices that are contributing to their health. So around diet and exercise, it helps people manage their diabetes, their weight, their blood pressure, all of the sort of holistic things that contribute to good health outcomes, or sort of what this platform is pulling together. And people are willing to pay for it. It's not so much a B2C play. It's employers and insurers are paying for subscriptions for their employees and for their for their insured people. But they wouldn't do that without evidence that shows it actually improves health outcomes. So this is what digital health is moving towards. It's not just an app that seems like a good idea that asks people to manually enter their data anymore. They're really comprehensive, predictive, streamlined things that have shown that they can actually change health metrics. And
in a way, Kristen, are they a phantom version of a community? In other words, instead of having 50 people surrounding you, you've got an app which gives you a community you can engage with. In other words, it's a psychological support which in years gone by would have been brought in by family, community, and because you don't have that, what you do is you do it down a wire, and you get to someone who coaches you and says, Tony, you're looking very red today, you might have high blood pressure.
There is some of that. I think it's a lot. Some of them have live coaches. I think Noom, that partnered with Novo Nordisk, may or may not have live coaches. I know there's a company called Vida in the US that's also done pharma partnerships, and I think it's like a sports coach that or someone, a music teacher giving you music lessons. If you knew you were never going to have a piano lesson, probably you would never practice. But if that lesson's coming up, you're more likely to stay on track or say, well, I know it's coming up. It's check-ins, it's human accountability. So sometimes they are sort of AI chatbot coaches. Sometimes they are human coaches that are then augmented by having access to the data that people are submitting through their wearables. Just someone to, rather than your twice yearly checkup with your doctor to adjust your diabetes medications, it's a more holistic support system to keep people on track with behavior change that they need to make that diabetes treatment more successful. And I think that's why you see partnerships like Novo Nordisk and Noom, where I think it was last year that Novo said but they did a deal with Noom, which is similar to Livongo. And anyone being prescribed their obesity drug Saxenda would get 12 months of access to Noom's service as well. So in that sense, I mean, that business model is a pill plus solution, where if this is prescribed, patients get this as well. But Noom also has business models through.
So Kristen, just think of the future. Will we be with all of this in the next? Because you tell me everything's moving very fast. Where will we be in 5 years, and where will we be in 50 years?
I think in 5 years, a lot of these things they're going to keep consolidating. So you've got companies that are already consolidating together. I think a couple of weeks ago, Omada raised like 60 million pounds and spent 30 some odd of it on a virtual physical therapy company. So I think what you'll like as we see with electronic health records starting to integrate telemedicine, I think it's likely that you'll start to see some of the health records or population management things integrating some of these things that have been shown to work. The things that work will be incorporated, and the things that don't really work will sort of fall by the wayside.
And what will it be like in 50 years?
I don't know. I'm not sure we could have predicted all the stuff that's happening now 50 years ago. But I don't know.
Will you be able to pick your phone up and just pick it up, and it will bleep and it will say you're not very well? Go and see a doctor.
Yeah, this is some of the stuff that people are trying to work towards. I think some of it's trying to be implemented a bit too early, but
I think that's a fantastic talk. I think we're coming to a time where we need to open the questions, Graham. Yeah. That was fantastic, Kristen. I mean, it's mind blowing. I think to as a drug hunter like myself, it's like, where does all this fit in? I'd be interested to see where the chat goes. Graham, maybe you can help us.
Yeah, Pilar might be able to give us some examples of pharma partners. If you go forward with your comment, Pilar.
Yeah, hi. Well, first of all, Kristen, fabulous. Thank you so much. I have to leave very soon, unfortunately, so I wanted to chime in. Like Christine, I also work in the area of digital health. So we work across EMEA and bring in solutions. My background, I come from the technology side. Now it's called digital. And I would say that how relevant is that for pharma? We normally adopt for our customers the same approaches we adopt for healthcare systems. We look at the pathways or workflows of pharma, and we see where digital health can add value. Because for us, for me in particular, digital health is just the online application of healthcare solutions. You have online and offline interventions, some aided by technology, some not. So it's a pathway or workflow. So where we have seen quite a lot of success in the last year or so in bringing partnerships together, big pharma and small companies, is in the area of beyond the pill services, of course, patient engagement. Yeah, that's the thing but with a bit of an edge, because obviously they want to reach beyond the patient so that, you know, people take better care of themselves. But I heard that a lot of companies in the US in particular are very interested in adopting digital therapeutics solutions, because that is a way to prolong the patent on the drug. In the same way that you change a molecule and it's a new drug. Apparently they're using digital therapeutics to ask for extensions. That's, you know, a bit of a gossip for the market. But beyond that, they're very useful for patients. But then what we discover is that digital healthcare solutions are even more relevant for the R&D process, because 53% of trials fails because of lack of adherence, wrong dose or wrong adherence. So we're introducing a few solutions to actually target that group. Normally, the entry point in pharma is an innovation department or a CSO, Chief Digital Officer. Most of them, they already have that role. But sometimes if our intervention is quite specific on a specific disease, we come through gastro or neuro or whatever, you know. And this is the point on the pharma. And then going, you know, into the B2C model that Christine left, I saw something very exciting recently. And that ties, you know, to Tony's comments about voice and about bots. Voice is definitely the application of the future is not going to be an app, and it's going to talk to us. We're going into platform-driven, you know, type of solutions with the big tech. And but then soon, if I want to sell something business to consumer, whether it's a drug or whether it's a device, I will have to sell it to a bot. So there is a new channel that's called business to robotics to consumer. We will have to adopt the protocols that the bot would use in order to recommend one solution over the other. And this is something that is in the works. Asia Pac is more advanced into that area, but this is a very exciting, you know, type of thing. You know, that and the digital biomarkers, of course, for pharma. But that's my comment.
Great, thank you very much for that comment. Perfect.
Well, thank you.
Yes, we have Harriet's got a thought she'd like to share with us as well, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fairly similar point, really, about sort of how I've seen pharma companies, although I'm not from a pharma background, using digital technologies, and it's really been in areas like patient education, looking at how you embed your, your pharmacological product into patient pathways. So I've seen some really interesting stuff about patient education using virtual reality, was one example. So yeah, I mean, I think the pharma companies are getting much smarter, and they know they can't just, make a new tablet and that's enough. They know that they've got to do much more about how they integrate it into health systems now. And that was just the point I wanted to make.
Great, thank you.
Just one comment. I mean, I suppose that, like when I developed tetrahydrolipstatin, which was the first obesity drug, we put a package around the drug, so we would give nurses who were like the coaches, or we would give all this package. But that doesn't seem to be really the big jump that digital is going to make. That's like supportive digiting, but there's something that digital is going to give that's more than that, when it starts replacing, I don't know, clinical trials with so you don't have to run it through a doctor, you can do it through I don't know, some virtual app or whatever. That seems there's a big jump and a small jump.
I think the biggest change that I've seen over the past 3 to 4 years has been improvements in data collection, so that they can be used in those contexts, in the context of a clinical trial, in the context of providing evidence for a drug, either through research or in the research stages, or through stage 4 sort of post-marketing surveillance stage. So the technology to collect real-world data and meaningful data, whether it's self-reported by patients or passively collected in different ways like digital biomarkers, has been improving. So it's been taken into account. So I think those I think are the biggest changes. That it's, yes, it can be sort of the supportive package that you mentioned, which we're still seeing some examples of that, but it's payers are now also being more stringent about what they're going to require to actually reimburse for medications. And often that includes some sort of proof that it's having some sort of impacts. And a lot of the data collection aspects of digital health support in those areas as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, Graham.
Yeah, Ali, did you have a question to add?
Yeah, I think this is sort of partly being picked up. I think I posted around the time you're talking about the engagement, but I work in communications, so that's always going to be sort of my angle I'm thinking of. So, anything like this, if an organization is introducing a new system, a new way of a new anything, a change, that triggers a need for communications. And so, any of the organizations that are creating these various bits and pieces of technology, they're going to be marketing to the organization that uses the technology. So, let's say it's it's an app for patients. The technology company is going to be marketing to the GPs, for instance. The GPs will then use it with the patients. And I'm just interested in to what extent the technology company then provides any sort of support for the GPs to actually bridge that communication gap in rolling it out to their patients, telling their staff about it. Not just sort of like a training manual, but a bit wider than that, giving them information beforehand to say that it's coming, perhaps reassuring about data issues, that sort of thing.
Yeah, there are lots of examples of clients that I've worked with that have integrated their systems into UK health systems. So like UK, for example, UK GP practices. And that's exactly it. A lot of it's that support in the actual real world implementation and the bumps of putting it into use, both for the doctors using it and for the patients. And some companies will put an implementation person in the office, physically in the office, to train the receptionists on how to use things, to train any differences to the workflow, to train the GPs on how to use things, to help put together, they'll work side by, the good ones I think, will work side by side with the practices on how to communicate to their patients that this is maybe a new way of accessing it, especially if we're talking about telemedicine. But That's a really good point, and that so many companies that I've worked with over the years or come across over the years say, oh, well, we've built this great thing and we're going to give it away for free. We're going to give it away in a pilot. They won't have to pay for it. So of course, everyone will adopt it. We'll show it works one place and then everyone will use it. Which never, ever, ever works. No. So people completely underestimate the cost, the non-financial costs of actually implementing a new system.
Actually rolling it out. Yeah, we've produced leaflets in the past about telehealth gadgets for a client, for a CCG. Because the CCG had bought them, they knew that it was great, but they needed to communicate to the client. So we were brought in to create leaflets, to get some case studies, that sort of thing. Now, really, if a tech company is selling these products, they could, in theory, pre-produce most of that stuff and just hand it out to the GPs or to whoever they're selling to.
Did Anne-Sophie want to add something? I just saw a comment. You're with Kaiku Health?
Yes, I'm with Kaiku Health, yes.
I could have included them in my presentation.
Yes, I was waiting for that. I'm just kidding. No, but thank you for a great talk. I'm thinking that when you presented those different categories in digital health, I think it's so important that we start thinking about how they actually interlink and looking at solutions that contain all of these. Yeah. So what we experience is that it's so important that you can have everything in one solution. So you as a user, either if you're a patient or a healthcare professional, you don't have to go different places to interact and to either generate or report data. So I think that is important. Then I think it's so important with meaningful interfaces. So I would say that the interfaces is the packaging of digital solutions. So if the users, and we are working with different users, so we are not only patients to healthcare professionals or healthcare professionals to pharma or medtech, we work as a node, and unless there is a useful interface, the data is not focused and it won't be used and it won't create value. So just 2 thoughts from me.
I didn't want to hide Graham's. Graham is the moderator.
There you go. I'm going to get Michael in. He's got, obviously, he's got a question around a very important matter when we're talking about data, I believe.
Yeah, hi, Kristen. Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion on digital health. I think in the past, as a non-expert on this area, I've thought of digital health in 3 main buckets. One is what you've already mentioned about how it could support ongoing clinical trials, patient selection, monitoring of compliance, and so on, which is a clear benefit for the pharma industry in improving efficiency of trials, which is a woefully weak point in the whole development process. The second, as you also mentioned, was for on-market drug support, where gathering real-world evidence supports reimbursement claims and also allows you to monitor for the emergence of unexpected side effects and so on. The big area that really concerns me, though, is the next stage where, especially if you have apps that are monitoring your health and alerting you need to go to the doctor, it doesn't take much imagination to see that healthcare insurers would like to get that data and see whether your healthy lifestyle that you said you had, you're actually doing. And I know from my experiences that healthcare companies are willing to lower your premiums if you're a non-smoker, non-drinker, non-risk taker. But if the apps show that you're doing those things and the healthcare insurers find out, then obviously that's going to affect your premiums. And it gets into this area of anything that's gathering data and feeding it into some database nowadays tend to be viewed with a lot of suspicion by the general public. And I wonder if there's a case for actually differentiating somehow in the perceptions between the good applications of digital health in helping clinical trials and drug reimbursement and monitoring drug safety, and the less clear, hazy areas where big companies, big government, whatever, is seen as monitoring their citizens through these health apps. And I guess, there's almost, if I were a digital health company, I'd almost want not to be associated with that bit of the industry and only to be associated with the clinical trials and drug monitoring safety aspects of it, and leave the proactive warning of patients of potential upcoming health issues. That's a really tricky area that touches on personal freedoms. Any thoughts on that?
It's a huge issue, and a lot of the things that I mentioned that are sort of holding back progress, not in a negative way, in a prudent and right way, focused around privacy and security. And I think those issues, it's sort of an overlapping adjacent area. Those issues also come up in contact tracing apps for COVID-19. There's been, the UK actually is a really interesting place to discuss that for, because a lot of other companies like Germany have opted for the decentralized approach to that, where information about your contacts and people who you are close to is held on specific devices, so the Google and Apple API. The UK, they might be backpedaling, I've seen in the past few days, wants a decentralized approach where it's held by government in a central place, all the people you've had contact with, over whatever period of time. And by the way, we're going to give that data to Palantir, which was the data analytics firm behind Brexit campaigns online and misinformation and the 2016 Trump election in the US. We're going to give them access to all that data, and they don't have to tell us how they're using it, and we're going to let them have it to do whatever they want for 20 years. So that's the current approach for contact tracing in the UK, according to the data analytics people who work for me at one of my projects. So I think I don't think that those are unfounded, and that's just one example of a specific question that I've asked in the past 4 weeks and gotten that answer. I think for other health things, like let's take a company like Livongo, or actually another company that I was looking at, I think also from Scandinavia, like Haiku, is called Health Navigator. So Health Navigator is a company that they basically, or it's already identified before they sign up for it, support high-risk patients. So patients who are already at high risk of having another hospitalization or other poor outcomes, and get them that support that they need. So it's sort of pre-identified patients who need specific nursing support or specific help with maintaining their health or sticking to a care plan, and sort of the resources go around them. So I think in specific scenarios, patients say, yes, can you help me with this, and sort of sign up to those things. I think that's quite different from complete Big Brother, like access to health, like all health information. But it's an issue that pervades all kinds of things. And when you're not the individual making that decision, I think it becomes even more an even bigger issue, because you don't have the control over that. A company that I think is at least trying to address that in their structure and their business model for how they work together of this data ownership, who owns it, maybe not so much I don't know the details of the privacy and security for individuals. Usually people say the data is anonymized. That's the way they get around it. But at the broader level of who owns the data and what are they using it for, and shouldn't the people who have generated this data benefit from it? A UK company that's addressing that really in what I think is an interesting way is Sensign. So Sensign works sort of as an AI docking station for data. Well, where do they get their data from? Well, they have to get it from NHS trusts, who hold the data. So should the trust just give it to them for free and then let them develop something and then buy back this technology product at a high price that a private company makes 100% of the profit from? I'm not sure that's the right thing to do. So Sensign has an interesting model where they make the trust who's supplying that data, that anonymized population level, anonymized data, a partner in that process. So they pay them an upfront fee for access to the data. And then, or at least as the FT reported, that trust has become a partner and eventually have a 5% stake of royalties of anything that's developed using that data. So at least in some way, the data, like where it's come from, it's sort of has a chance to go back into the system and support this patient population, like where it's come from, rather than completely privatizing it. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions in
mindful of time, and we've got a few more questions. I think, Mike, just that point, Mike, I think down there in the corner of my screen, I think that's when we talk about patients as personas, there is a bridge that's coming between clinical and marketing, and that's a very fascinating area. But we ain't got time for that. Now let's ask other questions, Craig.
Yeah, well, we've got a comment really from Colin Roberts, I believe. You're going to add something there.
Yeah, I guess I come at this from a slightly different angle. I exited a artificial intelligence and imaging business a number of years ago to one of the main players, and it's just really the trend on the sort of digital biomarkers perspective. And what we were seeing in the first instance was the large companies, the GEs, the Siemens, and people of this world acquiring essentially point solutions in imaging for a particular analysis within a clinical trial or a particular biomarker of disease that comes from medical imaging data. And I think what's really been interesting in the last 4 or 5 years has been the kind of disruptive nature of this technology making new business models. So a good example of this company called HeartFlow in the States. There's another one in Oxford called Cristo Diagnostics, where you take a very narrow biomarker and you surround that with a software as a service or analysis as a service business model, which gives you kind of global global scale with these types of algorithms, but you hold that IP very closely. Now, that IP can be transferred into a pharma company via clinical trial, because it could be an endpoint in a study, particularly in some of the cardiovascular applications. There are some very interesting biomarkers in lipid plaque formation and also the progression of that disease, which are now showing some efficacy. And as you move towards the promise of personalized medicine and imaging, looking at patients at an individual level, the computer is more powerful than the doctor, and that's been proven in studies that, you know, side-by-side comparison between radiologists and computers, the computer wins every time nowadays. So I think there's a really interesting disruption potentially happening in the medical imaging space, because it doesn't really work for the fee-for-service model, because the algorithms can't be charged on fee-for-service. If they do anything, they kind of disrupt that fee-for-service model. But on the flip side of that, on the public payer model, they can produce real efficiency that helps under pressure services to perform better. So I think there's a real tipping point coming, particularly in imaging, that these algorithms will, you know, democratize that process in terms of diagnosis. And as the diagnosis gets more pinpoint in terms of particular cancer therapies, and you need a specific biomarker and endpoint, that transition into pharma will happen in a much more deep and meaningful way. But be very interested to hear what Kristen thinks about that. I've very much enjoyed the talk so far.
I think cardiology is a really exciting space, and I followed it quite closely over a couple of years. I remember seeing HeartFlow a few times, and so many papers are being published about, I mean, it's really interesting stuff, like analyzing EKG data, historical EKG data, and being able to predict with really high accuracy who is going to have a cardiac event within the next 5 years with astonishing accuracy. Like, these are things that we don't, or even Google published last year, being able to predict a cardiac event, it might have been within 3 years, just by a retinal scan alone. So what's interesting about that is not that they can do it, but that you can make a clinical prediction on one piece of data that any high street optometrist, minimally trained optometrist can obtain for you. Previous prediction models, you needed demographic info, which is sometimes incomplete in medical records. You might need lab data, you might need cholesterol, triglycerides, you'll need other biometric type physiologic data. You know, quite a lot of data points to be able to make these clinical predictions. But the thing that's really exciting to me, especially in the field of cardiology, which has a lot of interest because it's expensive when things go wrong, is now we're starting to see like one piece of data, one snapshot of an EKG or of a retinal scan that is starting to be able to predict these things. It will take a while for it to get implemented. Google also published, it was last month or the month before, they tried to implement retinal scanning for diabetic retinopathy in Thailand, so in sort of a developing health market, and just like the logistics of implementing it in the clinic setting, like actually getting it in use, which I think were some of the points that maybe Alison brought up, like drastically affected its accuracy. But I think that happens with any kind of new technology. I think that's sort of like bumps that will get ironed out along the way. But cardiology in particular, I think, is really interesting because of its people are interested in it and they're going to be willing to pay for it because when things go wrong, it's very expensive. So I think payers are interested in it, I think, and because people are interested in it and there are markets for it, pharma companies are also, you know, very interested in this space. And if they're able to better identify which patients will benefit, then they may be able to run better trials and have better results and take something that maybe wouldn't have worked before, or if it was the same in both groups. If you can better identify which patients it's going to work in, then you're going to have better results and you're going to have an it did work trial.
We think about time, Graham. I mean,
yeah, we're coming towards the end, aren't we?
I'd like to ask Vikas how India is.
Yes, tell us, Vikas, how are you?
Hi, Tony. Hi, Graham. Hi, Christine.
Hi, Vikas. Tell us how it's going.
I think when the world reached, the different countries across the world reached the peak of this COVID-19 impact, those countries started coming out of lockdown. But then when India went into lockdown, we had the curve at a rock bottom level. but it started growing, and we decided to come out of lockdown when we are going towards the peak. So I think we are struggling with how to manage such a large population and still balance the economy. But I think we'll see how it goes over the next couple of weeks. But the government has launched an app, a mobile application that tracks the well-being of everybody across the country. So anybody who has a smartphone can download this app, and it's kind of mandatory. It is so whenever anybody is moving around across the world, across the country, one has to keep this app active. The Bluetooth connection should be on, and then one should be doing self-assessments almost on a daily basis. So by this, if somebody is not feeling well, then this app will automatically send the data back to the government. So in a way, the government can kind of trace people, trace areas where the infection could be there. So accordingly, things are happening.
Fantastic. Vikas, well, we wish you the very best, as always. I think we're just about winding up, Graham. Can I just thank Kristen from all of us. Awesome presentation. As always, more questions than answers. We'd like you maybe to come back again and tell us more, because we're all very interested, but it sort of does some of our brains in, because we're trying to work out how we bring that into the drug discovery world. What have we got to look forward to, Graham, for the rest of the week and for next?
Yeah, we're going to try something new on Thursday, so hopefully you'll be up for this. It's getting to know you, so we're going to just break people into rooms, and then we've had this wonderful following over the last 10 weeks or so, and we just want to bring people together. We've heard from various people that it is difficult to do business development, and we just want to try that. It's a bit like speed dating in a way, but for business. So we're going to give that a trial run, aren't we, on Thursday?
Yeah, I think back to connections in this digital world. So we look forward to welcoming you back again. Thanks again to everyone. Thanks to Kristen, all presentation, and see you next time. Be careful, and bye for now.
Okay, take care, everybody. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.